She saw her ex on the beach, and the man he became made her heart race all over again. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The Miami sun kissed Ayanna Brooks on shoulders as she adjusted the beach umbrella, watching her sister Naomi cradle 6-month-old Isabella against her chest. The baby's soft coos mixed with the rhythmic crash of waves, creating a symphony that should have been peaceful. Yet Ayanna's fingers drummed restlessly against her coffee cup, her mind still racing with the remnants of Boston's corporate chaos she'd left behind. "You're doing it again," Naomi observed, her voice gentle but knowing. "That thing where you pretend to relax, but your brain is still running a marathon." Ayanna forced a smile. "I'm working on it. Dr. Patterson said the sabbatical would help me reconnect with what matters." She reached over to stroke Isabella's tiny fist. "Like being here for this little miracle." The morning stretched before them, golden and full of possibility. Ayanna had been in Miami for 3 days, and for the first time in months, her phone remained silent in her beach bag. No urgent calls from patients needing occupational therapy sessions. No administrative meetings that could have been emails. Just sand between her toes and the salt-tinged air filling her lungs. "Remember when we used to come here as kids?" Naomi asked, shifting Isabella to her other arm. "You'd build those elaborate sandcastles, complete with moats and bridges. You were always the planner, even then." "Someone had to be," Ayanna replied, though her tone lacked its usual defensiveness. "Especially after—" She stopped herself. Even now, 7 years later, she couldn't easily voice what had happened with Caleb, the way he disappeared from her life so suddenly, leaving her with nothing but questions and a heart that had taken years to mend. Isabella gurgled, as if sensing the shift in conversation, and both sisters turned their attention to her. Ayanna marveled at how someone so small could radiate such pure joy, such uncomplicated love. Maybe that's what she needed to learn again, how to love without analyzing every angle, every potential outcome. "I think I'll take a walk," Ayanna announced, standing and brushing sand from her sundress. "Give you two some bonding time." "Don't go too far," Naomi called after her. "And Ayanna, try to actually enjoy yourself. That's an order from your little sister." Ayanna laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, dotted with early morning joggers and families setting up for the day. She walked close to the water's edge, letting the cool foam wash over her feet. The familiar ache in her chest surprised her. Not the sharp pain of fresh heartbreak, but the dull throb of an old wound that never quite healed. Miami held too many memories. She and Caleb had talked about coming here together once, about running along this very beach at sunrise, about building a life that felt as infinite as the horizon. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the present, the sandpipers darting in and out of the waves, the distant laughter of children, the rhythmic pounding of feet on packed sand approaching from behind. Ayanna stepped aside to let the runner pass, but something made her look up. Time crystallized in that moment, the world narrowing to a single point of recognition that hit her like a physical blow. Caleb Jennings, 7 years older, his dark hair shorter now, silver threading through at the temples, his shoulders broader, his stride more purposeful. But those eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once held her entire world, were unmistakably his. He stumbled slightly when he saw her, his steady rhythm faltering. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, the morning sun creating a halo around his silhouette. "Ayanna!" His voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by time and surprise. Her name on his lips sent a tremor through her entire body. All the careful walls she'd built, all the therapy sessions and self-help books, and determined moving forward, everything crumbled in an instant. Caleb. She barely whispered his name, afraid that speaking louder might shatter whatever strange spell had brought him here. He took a step closer, his running shoes sinking into the wet sand. "What are you doing in Miami?" "Visiting family." The words came automatically, her professional training kicking in to maintain composure even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I live here now. Have for about 3 years. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her chest tight. I can't believe... what are the odds? What are the odds? Indeed. Ayana thought of Isabella's birth, of her sudden decision to take a sabbatical, of choosing this particular beach on this particular morning. Maybe some things were meant to happen. You look, he started, then stopped, his gaze taking in her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious. You look beautiful, Ayana. Happy. The compliment stung more than an insult would have. Happy? She'd spent years learning to be content, to be functional, to be successful. But happy. Thank you, she managed. You look well, too. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with 7 years of unspoken words. Ayana became acutely aware of everything, the way the breeze lifted her hair, the warmth of the sand beneath her feet, the way Caleb's presence seemed to alter the very air around her. I should go, she said finally, taking a step backward. My sister's waiting. Of course. He nodded, but his expression fell slightly. It's good to see you, Ayana. She turned to walk away, each step feeling like she was leaving a piece of herself behind. But she'd learned to walk away from things that hurt her. It was a skill she'd mastered. Ayana, wait. His voice stopped her, and she found herself turning back despite every instinct screaming at her to keep walking. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I know it's complicated, but He struggled for words, and in that struggle, she saw a glimpse of the young man she'd once loved. There's so much I'd like to say to you. Her throat felt tight. I don't think that's a good idea. Please. The word came out raw, vulnerable. Just coffee. One conversation. Then if you want me to leave you alone forever, I will. Ayana looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something different in his eyes. Not the restless uncertainty of their youth, but a quiet desperation, as if this moment meant everything to him. Against her better judgment, against every self-preservation instinct she'd developed, she heard herself say, "There's a cafe on Lincoln Road. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you. I'll be there." She nodded once and walked away, not trusting herself to say anything else. Behind her, she heard him resume his run, his footfalls growing distant. When she reached Naomi and Isabella, her sister took one look at her face and sat up straighter. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ayana sank into her beach chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Worse," she said, staring out at the endless ocean. "I saw my past running straight toward me." Ayana changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, then immediately regretted caring what she looked like. She arrived at the Lincoln Road Cafe 15 minutes early, ordering a latte she didn't want and claiming a corner table where she could watch the entrance. The familiar anxiety crept up her spine, the same feeling she'd had before every date in college, every job interview, every moment when her carefully constructed world felt fragile. She'd spent the previous evening lying awake, alternating between rehearsing what she'd say and planning her escape routes. Naomi had tried to talk her out of coming. "You've worked so hard to heal from whatever happened between you two," she'd said while feeding Isabella. "Why reopen that wound?" But Ayana couldn't explain the magnetic pull she'd felt on the beach, the way seeing Caleb had awakened something she'd thought was safely buried. Some conversations, she realized, were inevitable. At exactly 10 o'clock, he walked through the door. Gone was the running gear, replaced by dark jeans and a crisp white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He moved with new confidence, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. "You came," he said, as he approached her table, and she heard genuine surprise in his voice. "I said I would." He sat across from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, different from what he'd worn in college, more sophisticated, more settled. Like everything else about him, it spoke of a man who'd found his place in the world. "Can I get you something?" she asked, gesturing toward the counter. "I'm good." He leaned back slightly, studying her face. "I was afraid you might change your mind." "I almost did." The honesty surprised her, but something about his presence made pretense feel impossible. "About a dozen times." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But you're here." "I'm here." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing something to anchor her. "So talk, Caleb. You said you had things to say." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I've thought about what I'd say to you if I ever saw you again. Practiced it, actually. But now—" He shook his head. "No, I don't know where to start." "Start with why you left." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "Start with why you disappeared from my life like I meant nothing to you." Something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, something deeper. "You meant everything to me. That's why I left." "That makes no sense." "It did to me at the time." He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that transported her back to their college apartment, to late nights, studying together, to the way he'd looked when he was struggling with something he couldn't put into words. "My father was sick," he said quietly. "Cancer, stage 4. He'd been hiding it for months before he finally told us." Ayanna felt her breath catch. In all her imagined scenarios about why he'd left, illness had never been one of them. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. My mother was falling apart, and my sister was only 16. Someone had to hold the family together. "So you left school, left Boston, left me." She kept her voice neutral, professional, but inside she felt the old hurt resurging. "I tried to tell you so many times, started letters I never sent, picked up the phone and hung up. I was 22 years old and terrified, and I thought—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" "From watching me fall apart, from having to choose between your dreams and mine, from being tied to someone who didn't know if he'd ever be able to give you the life you deserved." The cafe bustled around them, but Ayanna felt like they were in a bubble, suspended in time. She thought about her 21-year-old self, so sure of their future together, so ready to face anything as long as they faced it together. "You should have told me," she said. "You should have trusted me." "I know that now." His voice was rough with regret. "I've known it for years, but at the time I was drowning, and I couldn't bear the thought of pulling you down with me." "How is he?" "Your father." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a shadow passing over his features. "He fought longer than anyone expected. Made it almost 3 years. He died when I was 25. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. Despite everything, despite the years of hurt and anger, she was genuinely sorry for his loss. "Thank you." He met her eyes again. "He asked about you, near the end. Wanted to know if I'd ever told you the truth." "What did you say?" "That I was a coward, that I'd let the best thing in my life walk away because I was too proud to ask for help." Ayanna felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She couldn't afford to be vulnerable here, not when she was still trying to understand how she felt about any of this. "What about you?" Caleb asked, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me about Boston, your career. Are you happy?" The question she'd been asking herself for months. "I'm successful. I have a practice that helps people rebuild their lives after trauma. It's meaningful work." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him sharply, surprised by his directness. The Caleb she'd known had been gentler, more careful with difficult questions. "Happiness is complicated," she said finally. "And it doesn't have to be," says the man who left the person he loved to protect them from his problems. The words hung between them, sharper than she'd intended. Caleb winced, but he didn't look away. "You're right. I made happiness complicated because I was afraid of it, afraid I didn't deserve it after what I'd put my family through, what I'd put you through. And now I've learned that running from the things that scare you only makes them bigger. Now I know that some mistakes can be forgiven, if you're brave enough to ask." Ayanna felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. She'd come prepared for closure, for a neat ending to an old chapter. Instead, Caleb was offering something that looked dangerously like a new beginning. "I can't," she said, standing abruptly. "This is too much. I need time to think. Ayanna, please." "No." She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with panic. "I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." She rushed toward the door, but his voice followed her. "I'll be running the beach path tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. If you want to talk more, I'll be there." She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge that she'd heard him. But as she walked quickly down Lincoln Road, her heart pounding and her thoughts scattered, she knew she'd already decided. She'd be there. Ayanna's running shoes felt foreign on her feet as she made her way to the beach at 6:45 a.m. She hadn't run in months, preferring the controlled environment of her gym's elliptical machine to the unpredictability of outdoor exercise. But something about the idea of meeting Caleb on his terms, in motion, rather than static across a cafe table, felt right. The beach was quieter at this hour, populated mostly by serious runners and early dog walkers. She found a spot near the lifeguard stand and began her warm-up stretches, watching the horizon for his familiar silhouette. He appeared at exactly 7, jogging toward her with the easy stride of someone who ran every day. When he spotted her, his pace slowed, and she saw surprise and something that might have been hope cross his features. "You came," he said, slightly breathless. "I need to understand," she replied, falling into step beside him as they began a slow jog south along the waterline. "Yesterday, you gave me pieces of the story, but I need to understand all of it." They ran in silence for several minutes, finding their rhythm. Ayanna had forgotten how good it felt to move through space with someone else, to match breathing and pace, to share the simple act of forward motion. "After Dad died," Caleb began, his voice steady despite their pace, "I went a little crazy, partied too much, made some bad decisions. I was angry at the world, at God, at myself, angry that I'd wasted 3 years focused on his illness instead of living my own life. That's understandable. Maybe. But understanding it and living through it are different things. I hurt people, good people who cared about me." He paused, adjusting his stride to match hers as they navigated around a family of sandpipers. "I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone who used grief as an excuse to avoid responsibility." They crested a small dune, and Ayanna felt her breath beginning to catch. Caleb noticed immediately, slowing their pace without comment. "So what did you do?" "Got help. Real help. Not just the kind where you talk about your feelings and expect that to fix everything. I went back to school, finished my degree in environmental engineering, started working for a company that builds sustainable coastal developments. Here in Miami. Started in California, then they transferred me here. I've been working on a project to restore the coral reefs, prevent beach erosion. Turns out there's something therapeutic about trying to fix the things that are broken." The irony wasn't lost on Ayanna. While she'd built a career helping people rebuild their lives after trauma, he'd chosen to rebuild actual environments damaged by neglect and time. "What about relationships?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm. Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "A few. Nothing that stuck. I kept comparing everyone to—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "To what?" "To the memory of someone who knew me before I broke, someone who believed I could be better than I was." They reached a jetty and stopped running, both of them breathing hard. Ayanna bent over, hands on her knees, and realized she felt more alive than she had in months. "I did the same thing," she admitted. "Compared everyone to you. It wasn't fair to them." "Did you ever come close to marrying someone?" The question caught her off guard. "Once. A colleague named David. He was kind, stable, everything I thought I wanted." "What happened?" "I realized I was trying to marry the opposite of you, not because I didn't love you anymore, but because I loved you too much. I couldn't risk feeling that vulnerable again." They sat down on the jetty rocks, watching the waves crash against the concrete barriers. The morning sun was getting stronger, and Ayanna could feel sweat cooling on her skin. "I have something to tell you," Caleb said, his voice suddenly serious. something I should have mentioned yesterday." Her stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The other shoe. The reason this feels too good to be true. I'm leaving Miami in 6 weeks. Leaving? She tried to keep her voice neutral, but she heard the disappointment leak through. The reef project is wrapping up, and my company offered me a promotion. I'd be overseeing environmental restoration projects across the Southeast. It's the opportunity I've been working toward for years. That's wonderful, she said, and meant it, even as her heart sank. Congratulations. The thing is, he continued, turning to face her fully, the position is based in Boston. Boston. The word hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they should cross. "I haven't accepted yet," he said quietly. "I've been stalling on giving them an answer." "Why?" "Because 3 weeks ago, I made peace with the idea of leaving everything behind again, and then I saw you on the beach, and suddenly leaving feels impossible." Ayanna stared out at the ocean, watching a pelican dive for fish. "You can't make career decisions based on seeing me once. Twice. And I'm not making it based on seeing you. I'm making it based on remembering who I used to be when I was with you, who I could be again. Caleb, I know it's crazy. I know we've both changed, that we're not the same people we were 7 years ago, but seeing you again, talking with you, it feels like coming home." She closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face and the salt breeze in her hair. Part of her wanted to tell him to tired, if something was bothering you, if you needed to laugh, and he was curious about everything. We'd walk through Boston, and he'd stop to read historical markers, or ask street musicians about their songs, or strike up conversations with elderly people sitting on park benches. Sounds like someone who pays attention. He did, maybe too much. He was always worried about taking care of everyone else, his family, his friends, me. I think that's part of why he didn't tell me about his father. He was so used to being the one who solved problems, he couldn't admit he had problems that needed solving. Isabella grabbed a handful of Ayanna's hair, tugging gently. Ayanna carefully extracted the tiny fingers, marveling at how someone so small could have such a strong grip. "What's he like now?" Naomi asked. "Different, more settled, but also more intentional. Like he's thought carefully about who he wants to be instead of just reacting to circumstances." Ayanna paused. "He talks about his work the way I talk about mine, like it's not just a job, but a way of making things better. Sounds like you both grew up. Maybe, or maybe we just learned to carry our damage better." Naomi was quiet for a moment, watching as Isabella played with the pendant on Ayanna's necklace. "You know, when Marcus and I went through that rough patch last year, my therapist said something that stuck with me. She said that sometimes we confuse healing with forgetting, but real healing means learning to remember without bleeding. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Maybe you learn together." The front door opened, and Marcus called out that he was home from work. Ayanna had always liked her brother-in-law. He was steady and kind, the sort of man who brought flowers home for no reason and helped with dishes without being asked. The sort of man she'd tried to convince herself she wanted. "There are my girls," Marcus said, entering the kitchen and kissing Naomi before taking Isabella from Ayanna's arms. "How was everyone's day?" "Ayanna had a date," Naomi said, ignoring her sister's sharp look. "A date?" Marcus raised an eyebrows. "Good for you. Tell me about him." "It wasn't a date," Ayanna protested. "It was a run with someone I used to know." "Ah," Marcus grinned, settling Isabella in her high chair. "The mysterious ex who shall not be named." "I've mentioned him. Only in the way people mention something when they're trying very hard not to mention it," Naomi said. "Plus, you get this look whenever anyone brings up your college years, like you're remembering something beautiful and painful at the same time." Ayanna felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with romantic relationships and everything to do with being known by family who loved her enough to pay attention. "His name is Caleb," she said quietly. "We were together for 2 years. I thought we were going to get married." "What happened?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle. "His father got sick. He left school to take care of his family, and he didn't tell me why, just disappeared from my life." Marcus winced. That's rough, on both of you. He says he was trying to protect me. Classic guy move, Marcus said, earning a look from Naomi. What? We're idiots when it comes to that stuff. We think we're being noble, but mostly we're just scared. Scared of what? Of being seen as weak, of not being able to handle our problems, of dragging down the people we love. He shrugged. I did the same thing when I got laid off 3 years ago. Spent 2 weeks pretending to go to work rather than tell Naomi what happened. You did what? Naomi stared at her husband. See? Still makes her mad. Marcus reached over to squeeze Naomi's hand. But the point is, sometimes we make stupid decisions when we're hurt and scared. Doesn't make them right, but it makes them human. Isabella banged her hands on her high chair tray, demanding attention, and the conversation shifted to dinner preparations. But as Ayanna helped set the table, she found herself thinking about what Marcus had said, about the difference between noble and scared, between protection and abandonment. Later that evening, after Isabella was asleep and Marcus was watching baseball, Ayanna and Naomi sat on the back patio sharing a bottle of wine. What are you going to do? Naomi asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to run back to Boston tomorrow, pretend this never happened. And the other part. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of distant traffic and the rustle of palm fronds in the evening breeze. The other part wonders if this is what second chances look like, messy and complicated and terrifying. Love usually is. I'm out of practice. I've gotten so good at being alone, at not needing anyone. I don't know how to let someone in again. Maybe you start small. Maybe you just see what happens when you stop trying to control the outcome. Ayanna thought about Isabella's complete trust when she reached for people, her willingness to be held without guarantees. Maybe courage wasn't about knowing what would happen. Maybe it was about reaching anyway. I'm seeing him again tomorrow, she said. Good. Naomi raised her wine glass. To second chances. To second chances. Ayanna echoed, clinking glasses with her sister, and to hoping I'm brave enough to take one. The next morning brought clouds and the promise of rain, but Ayanna found herself on the beach anyway. Caleb was already there, stretching against the lifeguard stand, wearing a light jacket over his running gear. Looks like we might get wet, he said as she approached. I don't melt, she replied, beginning her own warm-up routine. They started their run at an easy pace, the beach less crowded under the overcast sky. The air felt heavy with moisture, and the waves seemed more aggressive, crashing higher up on the shore. Tell me about your sister, Ayanna said as they found their rhythm. She was 16 when your father got sick, 17 by the time he died. She's remarkable, took on way more than she should have had to. Caleb's voice carried a mixture of pride and regret. She practically ran the household while Mom was dealing with Dad's treatments. Made sure everyone ate, did the grocery shopping, even helped with Dad's medical appointments. That's a lot for a teenager. Too much. I was so focused on the big picture, managing Dad's care, dealing with insurance, trying to keep the family finances stable, that I didn't realize how much I was asking of her. They reached their usual turning point at the jetty, but instead of stopping, Caleb gestured toward a path that led away from the beach. Oh, want to see something? Ayanna nodded, curious. The path wound through sea grapes and native plants, eventually opening onto a small observation deck overlooking a conservation area. The view was stunning. Mangroves stretched as far as she could see, their roots creating an intricate network in the shallow water. This is part of the project I've been working on, Caleb said, leaning against the deck railing. 3 years ago, this was all dying coral and polluted water. Now look at it. Ayanna could see fish moving in the clear water, birds nesting in the restored mangroves. It's beautiful. It's proof that things can be healed, even when the damage seems irreversible. He glanced at her. Your turn. Tell me about your work. I help people relearn how to live after traumatic injuries. Stroke patients who need to regain fine motor skills, accident victims learning to adapt to physical limitations, people with brain injuries rebuilding their cognitive abilities. That must be emotionally difficult. It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding. There's this moment when someone who's been told they'll never walk again takes their first steps, or when someone with a brain injury remembers their child's name after months of struggle. Those moments make all the hard days worth it. The first drops of rain began to fall, and they both looked up at the darkening sky. "We should head back," Caleb said, but neither of them moved. "How is Lindsay now?" Ayanna asked. "She's a pediatric nurse in Denver, married to a good guy who makes her laugh. They're trying to have kids." His expression softened. "She calls me every week to check in, even though I'm the older brother. Old habits, I guess. Does she know about me?" "She knew about you then, kept asking why you stopped calling, why you didn't come to the funeral." He ran a hand through his hair. "I told her we'd grown apart. She never believed it." The rain was falling harder now, and they had to move closer together under the observation deck's small roof. Ayanna was acutely aware of his proximity, the way his jacket smelled like rain and salt air. "I wish I'd been there," she said quietly. "For the funeral, for you. I wish I'd let you be." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain create ripples on the water below. Ayanna felt something shifting between them, a deepening of understanding that went beyond their shared history. "Can I ask you something?" she said, "about the job offer. Why is it so important to you?" Caleb was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured. "For years after Dad died, I felt like I was playing catch-up with my own life. Everyone else my age was building careers, getting married, starting families. I was just trying to figure out who I was without grief defining me." He watched a heron pick its way through the shallow water below. "This job offer, it's validation that I didn't waste those years, that all the work I've done to rebuild myself actually means something. But when I imagine myself in Boston, in some corporate office, I don't see myself. I see who I think I should be." He turned to face her fully. "When I imagine staying here, continuing this work, building something real, when I imagine doing that with you in my life, that feels like who I actually am." The rain was coming down steadily now, drumming against the roof above them. Ayanna felt droplets misting her face despite their shelter. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked. "What if I can't be what you need me to be? Then we figure it out together, or we don't. And I still don't regret trying. You could end up with nothing, no job, no me, no plan. Or I could end up with everything I didn't know I was looking for." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Ayanna made a decision that surprised her. Instead of suggesting they run back to their cars, she sat down on the wooden bench that faced the water. "Tell me about the worst day," she said, "after your father died. Tell me about the day you hit bottom." Caleb looked surprised by the question, but he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "About 6 months after the funeral, I was living in this terrible apartment in Tampa, working construction because I couldn't concentrate on anything that required real thinking. I'd been drinking too much, sleeping too little. One day I woke up and couldn't remember the last time I'd called Mom or Lindsay, couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything." He paused, watching the rain create patterns on the water. "I drove to the cemetery where Dad was buried. Just sat there for hours, crying and angry and lost, and I realized I'd become exactly what he was afraid of when he got sick, someone so broken by loss that I'd forgotten how to live." "What did you do?" "Called Lindsay. Told her everything. She drove down from Georgia, where she was in nursing school, and basically staged an intervention. Made me promise to get help, to stop punishing myself for being alive when Dad wasn't." Ayanna felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I'm sorry you went through that alone. I chose to go through it alone. That's the difference between what happened to me and what I did to you. My father's cancer wasn't a choice, but pushing you away was." The honesty in his voice cut through her, sharp and clean. She thought about all the therapy sessions where she'd analyzed his abandonment, all the ways she'd tried to make sense of feeling discarded by someone who claimed to love her. "I was so angry," she admitted. "For years, I convinced myself that if you really loved me, you would have trusted me with the truth. You were right to be angry. I did love you, and I didn't trust you. I didn't trust that you'd stay if things got difficult, so I made sure you couldn't. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Exactly. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a closer rumble of thunder. The storm was getting serious, but neither of them moved to leave. "My turn," Caleb said. "Tell me about the day you decided to become who you are now, the moment you chose to help people heal instead of just healing yourself." Ayanna was quiet, thinking. "It was about 3 years after you left. I was working as an aide in a rehabilitation hospital while I finished my degree. There was this woman, Elena, who'd had a massive stroke. Her family had basically written her off, said she'd be better off in a nursing home." She smiled, remembering Elena was furious. She couldn't speak clearly, could barely move her left side, but her eyes were so determined. "I started working with her during my breaks, just simple exercises, nothing official." "What happened?" "It took 18 months, but she regained enough function to live independently. She sent me a card on the anniversary of her stroke every year until she died, said I was the first person who saw her as someone worth fighting for instead of someone to feel sorry for." That's when you knew. That's when I knew that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, that healing is possible, even when it looks impossible, that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. Caleb was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Is that what you're doing for me? Believing in me?" "I'm trying to figure out if I believe in us." The rain was beginning to lighten, though the sky remained dark. Ayanna realized they'd been talking for over an hour, completely absorbed in each other despite the weather. "We should go," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "In a minute." Caleb reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm, despite the cool air. "I know this is complicated. I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to know, whatever you decide, I don't regret seeing you again. I don't regret any of this." Ayanna looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt. 7 years, and her hand still fit perfectly in his. "I don't regret it either," she said quietly. "That scares me." "Good scared or bad scared?" "I haven't decided yet." As they finally made their way back through the rain to their cars, Ayanna felt something fundamental shifting inside her. Not just about Caleb, but about herself. About the woman she'd become and the girl she used to be, and whether there was room in her carefully constructed life for both. The storm was clearing as they reached the parking area, and shafts of sunlight were beginning to break through the clouds. Ayanna thought it might be a sign, though she wasn't sure of what. "Same time tomorrow?" Caleb asked as they reached her car. She hesitated, then nodded. "Same time tomorrow." As she drove back to Naomi's house, Ayanna caught herself smiling. For the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not because it was another day closer to her goals, but because it held the promise of something unknown and wonderful and terrifying. Maybe that was what hope felt like when you'd forgotten how to recognize it. Ayanna woke before her alarm, her body already attuned to the rhythm of morning runs. 3 weeks had passed since she and Caleb began meeting on the beach, and something had shifted in the dynamic between them. Conversations flowed more naturally, silences weren't loaded with tension anymore, and she'd begun to accept that maybe she could trust him again. But today was different. Today was her last day in Miami. She found Naomi in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while Isabella played in her high chair, smearing pieces of banana across her tray. "Are you going to tell him?" Naomi asked without looking up, as if she could read her sister's thoughts. "Tell him what? That you're flying back to Boston tomorrow? That this summer fantasy has an expiration date?" Ayanna poured herself coffee, avoiding her sister's penetrating gaze. "He knows this was a temporary visit. Knowing and accepting are different things." Naomi finally turned around, drying her hands on her apron. "He's in love with you, Ayanna. Anyone can see that. He's in love with the memory of who I used to be." "Are you sure about that? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like he's falling for exactly who you are now." Naomi moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Ayanna stared into her coffee cup, watching the steam rise. "What can I do? I have a life in Boston, a practice, patients who depend on me, a career I've spent years building, and he has a job offer in Boston that he's been stalling on because of you. That's exactly the problem. I can't be responsible for someone else's life decisions. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if he gives up everything and then resents me for it?" Isabella babbled loudly, demanding attention, and Naomi scooped her out of the high chair. "You know what I think? I think you're scared it will work. I think you're terrified of being happy." The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, realizing there might be truth in what her sister was saying. "Maybe I am," she admitted quietly. "Maybe I've gotten so good at being alone that I don't know how to be part of something bigger. Then maybe it's time to learn." An hour later, Ayanna found herself on the beach, but Caleb wasn't in his usual spot. Panic fluttered in her chest. What if he'd finally gotten tired of their careful dance around each other? What if he'd decided to take the job and leave without saying goodbye? She was about to turn back when she spotted him sitting on the jetty rocks, still in his running gear, but clearly not planning to run. He was staring out at the horizon, his posture tense with thought. "You're early," she said as she approached. He looked up, and she saw something different in his expression, a resolve that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. "Man, that sounds ominous. Sit with me." He patted the rock beside him, and she settled down, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I got a call yesterday," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "from my boss, the Boston position. They need an answer by the end of the week. What are you going to tell them?" "That depends on you." Ayanna felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. "Caleb, you can't—" "I'm not asking you to make the decision for me," he interrupted. "I'm asking you to help me understand what we're doing here, because these past few weeks, running with you, talking with you, it's been the most real I've felt in years. But I need to know if this is leading somewhere, or if we're just revisiting the past." She watched a pelican dive into the waves, emerging with a fish in its beak. Such a simple, purposeful existence. She envied its clarity. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said quietly. Caleb went very still beside her. "Tomorrow. My sabbatical is over. I have patients scheduled, responsibilities. Were you planning to tell me?" The hurt in his voice made her chest tight. "I didn't know how." "The same way you tell anyone anything important, with words." She turned to face him fully, seeing the pain she'd caused written across his features. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't want our last few days to be about endings." "So, what did you want them to be about?" "I don't know." The admission felt like failure. "I don't know how to do this, Caleb. I don't know how to want something this much and still be terrified of it." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below them. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but distant. "And I spent years learning to live with regret, learning to accept that some chances only come once, and if you don't take them, they're gone forever." He stood up, brushing sand from his shorts. "I thought maybe this was our second chance, but maybe some people are only meant to love each other from a distance." "Caleb, wait." But he was already walking away, his stride purposeful and final. Ayanna sat alone on the rocks, watching him disappear down the beach path, and felt something inside her chest crack open. She'd spent so many years protecting herself from this exact feeling, the raw, devastating awareness of loss. But as she sat there in the morning sun, listening to the eternal rhythm of the waves, she realized that protection had become its own kind of prison. When she finally made it back to Naomi's house, she found her sister packing Isabella's diaper bag, preparing for a trip to the pediatrician. "How did it go?" Naomi asked, then stopped when she saw Ayanna's face. "Oh, honey, what happened?" "I told him I was leaving tomorrow. He asked what we were doing, where this was leading, and Ayanna sank into a kitchen chair. "I couldn't give him an answer. Because you don't know, or because you're afraid to say it out loud? Both. Neither. I don't know anymore. Naomi set down the diaper bag and sat across from her sister. Let me ask you something. If you knew for certain that trying with Caleb would work out, that you'd be happy, that he'd be happy, that you'd build something beautiful together, would you do it? Of course. But that's not how life works. There are no guarantees. Exactly. There are no guarantees either way. You could go back to Boston and spend the rest of your life wondering what if, or you could stay and fight for something real. I can't just abandon my practice, my life. I'm not saying abandon anything. I'm saying expand. You're a brilliant occupational therapist, Ayanna. You could work anywhere. But Caleb, the man you are today, the woman he's become, this combination might only happen once. Isabella started fussing in her car seat, and Naomi stood to check on her. I have to get her to the doctor. But think about this. What would the 21-year-old you do? The one who was ready to take on the world with him. After they left, Ayanna found herself wandering through the house, touching familiar objects as if trying to memorize them. In the living room, she stopped in front of a framed photo of her and Naomi as children, building sandcastles on this very beach. She remembered that version of herself, fearless, optimistic, believing that love could conquer anything. When had she become so careful, so afraid of disappointment that she'd stopped reaching for what she wanted? Her phone buzzed with a text from her office manager in Boston. Doctor, Martinez wants to know if you're interested in taking over the Morrison account. Big expansion opportunity. Let me know. The Morrison account. She'd been hoping for that opportunity for 2 years. It would mean more prestige, more income, more of everything she'd thought she wanted. But as she stared at the message, all she could think about was Caleb's face that morning, the way he'd looked when she told him she was leaving, the way he'd walked away from her, shoulders set with a resignation that spoke of too many goodbyes. She thought about Elena, the stroke patient who taught her that being broken didn't mean being worthless, about all the patients who'd shown her that healing required risk, required vulnerability, required believing in possibilities even when the outcome was uncertain. Maybe it was time to take her own advice. Ayanna grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. She had no plan, no script, no idea what she was going to say. She only knew that she couldn't let him walk away again without fighting for what they might have together. The rest of her life was waiting. But first, she had something to say to the man who'd reminded her what it felt like to be truly alive. Ayanna drove through Miami's afternoon traffic with no clear destination, only knowing she needed to find Caleb. She tried his apartment first, a modest complex near the waterfront that he'd pointed out during one of their runs, but his car wasn't in the parking lot. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she didn't actually know where else to look for him. She sat in her rental car, engine running, feeling foolish and desperate. This was exactly the kind of impulsive behavior she'd trained herself to avoid. The old Ayanna would have made a list, developed a strategy, approached the situation logically, but logic hadn't gotten her very far in matters of the heart. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Dr. Patterson's name appeared on the screen, her therapist from Boston. Ayanna, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to check in about your return tomorrow. Actually, Dr. Patterson, you might be calling at exactly the right time. Ayanna closed her eyes, gathering her thoughts. I need to ask you something. Is it possible to heal from something and still be terrified of it happening again? Of course. Healing doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means learning to act despite the fear. There was a pause. What's happening, Ayanna? I'm in love with someone who broke my heart 7 years ago. He's here in Miami and he wants to try again, but I'm scared I'll lose myself if I let him in. And what would losing yourself look like? Ayanna watched a family walk past her car, parents holding hands while their toddler ran ahead, fearless and laughing, caring more about his happiness than my own, making decisions based on what he needs instead of what I need. Becoming someone I don't recognize. Is that what happened before? No, Ayanna admitted, surprised by the realization. Before, I think we were both just young. We loved each other, but we didn't know how to love ourselves yet. And now I know who I am. I know what I want from life, what makes me happy, what I won't compromise on. But I'm afraid that loving him will somehow erase all of that." Dr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "Ayanna, in all our sessions, I've never heard you talk about anything the way you're talking about this man. Your voice changes when you mention him. You sound alive. Is that good or bad?" "That depends. Are you ready to stop protecting yourself from life and start living it?" After they hung up, Ayanna sat in her car for another few minutes, thinking about Dr. Patterson's question. When had protection become more important than possibility? She thought about Caleb's restoration work, the way he'd shown her the transformed conservation area. He'd said it was proof that things could be healed even when the damage seemed irreversible. Maybe hearts worked the same way. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown local number. "Ayanna, it's Lindsay, Caleb's sister. He gave me your number a while ago in case of emergency. Can you meet me at Bayfront Park, by the amphitheater? It's important." Ayanna's blood ran cold. Emergency. Had something happened to Caleb? She typed back quickly. "On my way." 20 minutes later, she found Lindsay sitting on a bench overlooking Biscayne Bay. Even without having seen her in 7 years, Ayanna recognized her immediately. She had Caleb's eyes and the same thoughtful way of holding herself. "Lindsay?" Ayanna approached cautiously. The woman looked up and smiled, though there was sadness in her expression. "Ayanna, thank you for coming." She gestured to the bench beside her. "Sit, please. Is Caleb okay? Your text said emergency." "He's fine, physically." Lindsay tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I lied about the emergency. I'm sorry, but I flew in from Denver this morning because he called me last night, and I haven't heard him sound that broken since Dad died." Ayanna felt guilt wash over her. "I hurt him. I didn't mean to, but I did. He told me you're leaving tomorrow, that you couldn't give him an answer about where this was leading. I was scared. I am scared." "Of what?" Ayanna looked out at the water, watching boats drift by in the distance. "Of making the same mistakes, of losing myself in someone else's dreams, of caring so much that I can't function when it falls apart. Can I tell you something about my brother?" Lindsay shifted to face her more directly. "After you two broke up in college, and yes, I know he's the one who ended it, he dated other people. Nice women, smart women, beautiful women, but he never talked about any of them the way he talked about you. How did he talk about me? Like you were the standard by which he measured everything else, like you'd shown him what love could be, and nothing else ever came close." Lindsay's voice was gentle but firm. "And when he moved to Miami, I thought maybe he'd finally let you go. But then, a few weeks ago, he calls me, and his whole voice is different, lighter. He tells me he ran into someone from his past, and I knew immediately it was you." Ayanna felt tears threatening. "What did he say?" "That you'd grown into everything he always knew you could be. That you were still the kindest, strongest person he'd ever known, but now you had this confidence, this sense of purpose that took his breath away." Lindsay reached over and touched Ayanna's hand. "He said falling in love with you the first time was like being struck by lightning, but falling in love with you now felt like coming home. Then why didn't he fight harder this morning? Why did he just walk away?" "Because he's learned the difference between fighting for someone and fighting with someone. He won't pressure you into something you don't want." "But Ayanna," Lindsay's grip on her hand tightened. "He's at the airport right now, waiting for a flight to Boston. He decided to take the job." Ayanna's heart stopped. "What?" "He said if you were going back to Boston anyway, maybe this was the universe telling him where he belonged. His flight leaves at 7. Ayanna checked her phone. It was already 5:30. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because 7 years ago, you lost each other because of fear and miscommunication, because you're both different people now, better people, and you deserve a chance to see what those people could build together." Lindsay stood up. "And because my brother has spent years learning to live with regret, but I don't think he'll survive losing you twice." Ayanna stood too, her mind racing. "Which airport?" Which airline? Miami International, American Airlines, Gate D12. Lindsay smiled, the first genuine smile Ayanna had seen from her. I'll tell him you asked, but I won't tell him you're coming. That conversation needs to happen between you two. As Ayanna ran back to her car, she felt something shifting inside her chest. Not the familiar anxiety she'd carried for so long, but something that felt like wings unfurling. Maybe this was what courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Traffic was heavy on the way to the airport, and every red light felt like an eternity. But for the first time in years, Ayanna wasn't thinking about all the ways things could go wrong. She was thinking about all the ways they might go right. Miami International Airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of evening departures. Ayanna abandoned her rental car in the short-term parking garage and ran toward the terminal, her sandals slapping against the concrete. She'd never been the kind of person who made grand romantic gestures. Those belonged in movies, not in her carefully ordered life. But as she pushed through the sliding glass doors, she realized some moments demanded you become someone you'd never been before. Security took forever. She stood in line behind a family with 3 small children, watching the minutes tick by on her phone. 6:42 p.m. Caleb's flight was at 7, which meant boarding had probably already started. Her hands shook as she placed her purse on the conveyor belt, and the TSA agent gave her a concerned look. "You okay, miss?" "Just trying to catch someone before they make a mistake," she said, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, before I make a mistake again." The agent smiled knowingly. "Good luck." Gate D12 was at the far end of the terminal, and Ayanna half ran, half walked through the crowds, dodging rolling suitcases and families saying goodbye. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she imagined arriving to find an empty gate, imagined Caleb already in the air, flying toward a life that didn't include her. She rounded the corner to the D gates and saw the American Airlines desk. A small crowd of passengers sat in the waiting area, but she couldn't see Caleb among them. Panic rose in her chest until she spotted him near the windows, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. "No, it's sudden, Mom, but sometimes you have to trust that the universe is pushing you in the right direction," he was saying. "Boston feels like where I'm supposed to be right now." Ayanna approached slowly, her courage wavering. What if she was wrong? What if he'd already moved on from their conversation this morning, already accepted that they weren't meant to be? "Now boarding Group A for American Airlines Flight 1847 to Boston Logan," the gate agent announced. Caleb pulled his boarding pass from his pocket, and Ayanna saw that it was indeed Group A. He was going to board any minute. Caleb. He turned at the sound of his name, and she watched his face cycle through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "I have to go, Mom. I'll call you when I land." He hung up and stared at Ayanna. "What are you doing here?" "Stopping you from making a decision for the wrong reasons. And what reasons would those be?" She took a step closer, aware that other passengers were beginning to stare. "You're taking this job because I'm going back to Boston, because you think proximity is the same as possibility, isn't it?" "No," she shook her head. "Proximity without commitment is just geography, and I can't let you uproot your life for geography." "Now boarding Group B," the agent called. Caleb glanced at his boarding pass, then back at her. "So what are you suggesting? That I stay in Miami while you go back to Boston? That we try the long-distance thing? I'm suggesting that maybe Boston isn't where I belong anymore." The words hung in the air between them, and Ayanna saw the exact moment they registered. Caleb's eyes widened, and he took a step toward her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the past 3 weeks, I've felt more like myself than I have in years. I'm saying that I built a life in Boston, but I've been living it in Miami." She took a shaky breath. "I'm saying that I love you. Not the memory of you, not the idea of you, but you. The man who restores broken ecosystems and calls his sister every week and runs at sunrise because it makes him feel connected to something bigger than himself." "Ayanna, I'm not finished." Her voice grew stronger. "I'm also saying that I'm terrified. terrified of loving you this much, terrified of changing my entire life for someone, terrified of being wrong about this. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. Final boarding call for Group B, American Airlines Flight 1847 to Boston. Caleb looked at the gate agent, then at his boarding pass, then at Ayanna. Are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you to decide what you really want, not what you think you should want. And I'm asking you to know that whatever you decide, I'm staying in Miami. Not for you, but for me. Because this is where I want to build my life. You'd leave your practice. Everything you've worked for, I'd transfer my practice. There are people here who need occupational therapy too. There are broken things here that need healing. She smiled through the tears that had started flowing. And maybe I need to learn that home isn't a place you go back to. Maybe it's something you create. The gate agent was checking tickets for the last few passengers. Caleb was going to miss his flight if he didn't move soon. I need you to understand something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I would have taken that job anyway, not just because of you, but because I thought it was what I was supposed to want. What would prove I'd made something of myself. And now I know that the man I am here, doing this work, loving you, that's who I was supposed to become. He looked at his boarding pass one more time, then walked over to the gate agent. I need to give up my seat, he told her. Sir, the plane is about to depart. I know, I'm not getting on it. The agent looked confused, but processed his request. As Caleb walked back to Ayanna, she felt something settle in her chest. Not relief, exactly, but a sense of rightness, of pieces clicking into place. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure it out together. No secrets, no protecting each other from difficult truths. Just honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable, she agreed, echoing his words from weeks ago. As they walked away from the gate together, Ayanna felt the weight of 7 years of what-ifs lifting from her shoulders. They had no guarantees, no roadmap for how to blend two lives that had grown separately. But they had something more valuable, the willingness to try. Outside the terminal, the Miami sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Ayanna thought about Isabella's complete trust when she reached for people, her willingness to be held without knowing what would come next. Maybe that's what love was, reaching anyway, trusting anyway, building something beautiful, despite not knowing how the story would end. Ready to go home? Caleb asked, taking her hand. Yeah, she said, squeezing his fingers. And let's go home. 6 months later, Ayanna stood in the doorway of her new clinic in Coconut Grove, watching her latest patient, a 70-year-old former dancer named Carmen, take her first independent steps after a hip replacement. The woman's face radiated pure joy as she moved across the parallel bars without assistance, and Ayanna felt the familiar warmth of witnessing someone reclaim their life. Mira, doctora, Carmen called out in accented English. I'm dancing again. You certainly are, Ayanna laughed, making notes on Carmen's chart. But remember, small steps. We don't want to overdo it. Small steps, Carmen agreed, though her eyes sparkled with the same mischief Ayanna had noticed in their first session. But still, steps forward. See, Ayanna confirmed, thinking how that phrase had become something of a motto for her own life lately. After Carmen left, Ayanna tidied up the treatment room and locked the clinic. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined herself here, running her own practice in Miami, living in a sun-drenched apartment 2 blocks from the beach, building a life she'd never planned but somehow always needed. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been licensing paperwork, finding qualified staff, convincing her Boston colleagues that she wasn't having a midlife crisis. There had been moments of doubt, nights when she'd lain awake, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But then there were mornings like today, when she'd woken up in Caleb's arms as sunlight streamed through their bedroom window, when she'd driven to work with the windows down and arrived to find patients who needed her skills and appreciated her dedication. Those moments reminded her that some risks were worth taking. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. Caleb's name appeared on the screen, along with a photo he'd taken that morning of a manatee swimming near his restoration site. "Dinner at 7?" His text read, "I'm making that fish you like." "Can't wait," she typed back, adding a heart emoji that would have embarrassed her old self, but felt perfectly natural now. Their relationship had developed its own rhythm over the past months. They'd moved in together after 8 weeks of dating, a decision that would have terrified the old Ayana but felt inevitable to the woman she'd become. They worked well together, sharing domestic responsibilities and supporting each other's careers without losing their individual identities. Caleb had thrown himself into his restoration work with renewed passion, turning down 2 other job offers to stay with his Miami project. His latest initiative involved partnering with local schools to teach children about marine conservation, and Ayana loved watching him light up when he talked about 8-year-olds discovering hermit crabs for the first time. As she drove through Coral Gables toward their apartment, Ayana's phone rang. Naomi's name appeared on the dashboard display. "Hey, sister," Ayana answered through the car's speakers. "Hey yourself, how was your day?" "Good." "Carmen took her first independent steps. You should have seen her face." "That's wonderful, you sound happy." Ayana considered this. "I am happy, not just content or satisfied, but actually happy. It still surprises me sometimes." "Happiness will do that," Naomi laughed. "How's Caleb?" "Good. Working on a presentation for the city council about expanding the reef program. He's been practicing his speech on me all week." "And how are you two together?" It was a question Naomi asked regularly, not out of nosiness, but from genuine concern. She'd watched Ayana rebuild herself after heartbreak once, and wanted to ensure it wouldn't happen again. "We're solid," Ayana said, searching for the right word. "Different than we were in college, but in good ways. We both know who we are now, what we want from life. We support each other without losing ourselves. No regrets about leaving Boston. None. I miss you and Isabella terribly, but the work here is just as meaningful, and I love the pace of life. Plus, we're planning to visit you for Christmas, remember?" "I remember. Isabella's been practicing saying Tia Ayana for weeks." Ayana smiled, thinking of her niece, who was now walking and getting into everything. "How is my favorite little person? Destroying my house with systematic efficiency. Yesterday, she figured out how to open the kitchen cabinets. Marcus found her sitting on the floor surrounded by Tupperware, looking very pleased with herself. She's exploring her environment. It's a sign of healthy development." "Easy for you to say. You don't have to reorganize your entire house for someone 2 feet tall." They talked for a few more minutes before Naomi had to go rescue Isabella from some new mischief. As Ayana pulled into her apartment complex, she felt the familiar flutter of anticipation she'd come to associate with coming home to Caleb. She found him on their balcony, tending to the small herb garden they'd planted together. He was wearing the old t-shirt and shorts he favored for gardening, his hair slightly mussed from the ocean breeze. "How are my basil plants?" she called out, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "Thriving. I think they like the afternoon sun more than we expected." He straightened and smiled at her, the kind of smile that still made her stomach flutter. "How was Carmen today?" "Independent steps. She's already talking about taking salsa classes. From hip replacement to salsa dancing in 6 months. You're a miracle worker." "She did all the hard work. I just provided guidance." Caleb moved toward her, slipping his arms around her waist. "Don't sell yourself short. You have a gift for helping people believe in their own possibilities. Is that what I did for you?" "Among other things." He kissed her forehead. "And though I think we helped each other remember who we were, underneath all the caution and fear." Ayana leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him mixed with salt air and basil. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we found each other again, that we're building this life together. Believe it," he said softly. "We're here, we're happy, and we're not going anywhere." As the sun set over Miami, painting their balcony in shades of orange and pink, Ayana thought about all the small steps that had led her here. Choosing to take a sabbatical, visiting Naomi, deciding to run on the beach that morning 6 months ago. Each decision had seemed small at the time, but together they'd created a path to a life she never could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients to help, new moments to navigate as a couple. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man she loved, in a city that had welcomed her home, living a life that was entirely her own choosing. Sometimes the best stories, she realized, were the ones you wrote yourself. 1 year after the airport, Ayana found herself back on the same stretch of beach where everything had changed. But this time, she wasn't running alone in the early morning light. This time, she was surrounded by 50 of their closest friends and family, wearing a flowing white dress that caught the ocean breeze, watching Caleb walk toward her across the sand. The wedding had been Naomi's idea initially. "You two are already acting like an old married couple," she'd said during her Christmas visit. "You might as well make it official." But when Caleb had proposed 3 months later, not with grand gestures or elaborate plans, but simply over morning coffee on their balcony as they watched the sunrise, it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. "We could have a big wedding," he'd said, sliding the simple solitaire onto her finger. "Whatever you want. But all I really need is you, me, and someone to make it legal. And the ocean," Ayana had added, thinking of all their morning runs, all the conversations that had slowly rebuilt their trust and love. "I want the ocean to witness this." Now, as the officiant, a friend of Caleb's from his conservation work, spoke about the power of second chances and the beauty of growth, Ayana felt overwhelmed by the rightness of the moment. Her parents had flown in from Atlanta, beaming with pride at their daughter's happiness. Caleb's mother sat in the front row next to Lindsay, who held 18-month-old Isabella on her lap. The baby had been fascinated by the waves all morning, pointing and babbling excitedly every time one crashed nearby. "The couple has written their own vows," the officiant announced. Caleb took her hands, his own slightly trembling. In the year they'd been together, she'd seen him present to city councils and environmental groups, but she'd never seen him this nervous. "Ayana," he began, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. 7 years ago, I thought love meant protecting someone from your problems. I thought it meant being perfect, being strong enough to handle everything alone. I was wrong." He paused, squeezing her hands gently. "You've taught me that love means trusting someone with your imperfections. It means building something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone. It means choosing each other every day, especially on the days when it's difficult." Ayana felt tears starting, but she smiled through them. "I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is uncomfortable. I promise to support your dreams, even if they take you in directions I never expected. I promise to trust you with my fears, my hopes, and my whole heart." His voice broke slightly. "And I promise to never again make the mistake of thinking I'm protecting you by pushing you away." When he finished, Ayana could barely see him through her tears. She'd written her vows carefully, practicing them in the mirror, but now all her prepared words seemed inadequate. "Caleb," she said, finding her voice. "Yeah, and when I was 21, I thought love was about finding someone who completed you, someone who filled in all your empty spaces and made you whole." She looked out at the ocean, then back at his face. "But I was already whole. I just didn't know it yet. What I've learned is that love isn't about completion. It's about expansion. It's about becoming more yourself, not less." A pelican flew overhead, and she remembered their first morning back on this beach, how everything had felt impossible and terrifying. "You don't complete me, and I don't complete you. But together, we create something beautiful and complex and entirely our own. I promise to keep growing, to keep becoming the best version of myself, and to love the man you're becoming alongside me." She took a shaky breath. "And did I promise to trust this happiness, even when it feels too good to be true? I promise to choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, and you over anyone else, every single day. By the power vested in me by the state of Florida, the officiant said, grinning widely, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. As Caleb pulled her close and kissed her, Ayanna heard the cheers of their loved ones mixing with the eternal sound of the waves. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying, she saw their entire future stretching before them. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but full of possibility. The reception was held at a beachside restaurant overlooking the water. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Ayanna found herself on the deck, watching Isabella toddle around the dance floor while Marcus and Naomi swayed to the music. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Jennings, Caleb said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. Mrs. Jennings, she repeated, testing how it sounded. Oh, I think I like that. Just think. Okay, I definitely like it. She accepted the champagne and leaned against his shoulder. I was thinking about time. How funny it is that we needed 7 years apart to become people who could love each other properly. Do you think we would have made it if we'd stayed together back then? Ayanna considered this. Maybe, but we would have been different people. We might have loved each other, but we wouldn't have been this. And what is this? She gestured toward their family and friends, toward the life they'd built, toward the ocean that had brought them back together. This is 2 whole people choosing to build something bigger than themselves. This is love that's been tested and proven stronger than fear. As if on cue, Isabella broke away from her parents and toddled toward them, her arms outstretched. Ayanna scooped up her niece, who immediately pointed toward the water and babbled something that sounded like ocean. Yes, sweetheart, Ayanna said, kissing the top of Isabella's head. The ocean, it's where all the best stories begin. Caleb wrapped his arms around both of them, and Ayanna felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. Not because he filled some empty space in her, but because together they'd created something beautiful and lasting and entirely their own. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing the shore clean and beginning again, just as they had 7 years ago when 2 broken hearts had first found their way back to each other, and just as they would continue long after tonight, carrying new stories to new shores, full of endless possibility. The end. Do you believe some people are meant to be together, even after years apart? Ayanna and Caleb's story shows us that true love sometimes needs time to mature. They reunited after 7 years, more mature and ready to build something lasting. But was it destiny or simply the right timing? Have you ever had a second chance at love? Do you believe it's worth fighting for someone who was part of your past? Or do you think we should always move forward and never look back? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.